Well, I'm here with somebody who I've gotten a chance to know over a decade now, closing on 15 years. And so I'm glad to have him here and we can kind of chop it up. So, Trip Lee, where you from?
From Dallas, Texas.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I grew up, and that's where I currently live. I made some stops on the way.
So, Trip,
Yeah,
that's an interesting name.
yeah,
I get a sense that's not what your mama named you.
that's right. Yeah, I'm named after my grandfather and my father. So I'm William Lee Bearfield III. So Trip comes from me being a third. My middle name is Lee.
That's powerful because
Yeah.
that speaks to lineage and
That's right.
connection.
Yeah, both parents in the home.
Yep.
Both my parents super hard working. My dad grew up in the hood in Houston. His dad, my grandfather, was one of the first Black men to work in the particular factories that he worked in Houston. Worked really hard to be able to be in those positions. One of the first Black dudes they let operate that stuff.
Yeah.
And this is stuff that, like, when I'm a kid, I don't know this stuff, right? It's not till I'm grown and I'm like, tell me,
Yeah.
you 95, like you were alive during the roaring 20s, you know what I'm saying? Like, tell me about stuff. So, so my dad, 5 sisters, his mom dies when he's about 15. So my grandfather then is, working all the time, providing for 6 kids. My dad is able to help raise his sisters. And so my dad works really hard. First person in his family to go to college, and he's civil rights protesting kind of at the same time, but he kind of works his way through and super hard worker, which was a big part of the worldview he passed on to me. And my mom, very similarly, her dad was in the military. He was one of the first really high-ranking Black men in the military.
Wow.
So they grew up in a military family, all the while traveling all around the country. Just lived in a ton of different places, which was interesting during that time because, it could mean that traveling, they try to stay at a hotel. They did not even being able to stay at the hotel because they're a Black family, even though he's this high-ranking military official. And they go in some places. My mom, went to some school like the year after it was integrated, which is like, my mom's not that old. It's reminders that stuff isn't as far off as they seem. But my mom also, goes to HBCU and she ends up being a dentist. My mom's a pediatric dentist, had a business. Again, stuff I didn't appreciate as a kid. Like, she's had this good, successful business serving the community for 30 years. So very hardworking parents, which they really tried to instill in us. We didn't always enjoy that. Me and my sister, I have a sister that's 2.5 years older than me.
Okay. Now, you said that with a gleam in your eye, and I hear that you do have some funny stories about you and your dad, and you even talk about that a little bit in your book.
Yeah.
Paint us a picture of some of what that looked like.
Yeah, my dad was, because of how his world was shaped, the kind of hard work he had to do to make it to where he was. He really wanted to instill in me from the beginning of my life, like, for real, I don't care what you do, but you need to strive to be the best at it, right? And I think even a kind of perfectionism that is hard to even shake for me even now. There's a right way to do things that led to right results. You know what I'm saying? That is very much ingrained in me and how I see the world. There was grew up in a world where even more so than today, Black people, Black men are viewed in a particular way. And so a very hard emphasis on how you present yourself to the world and what that has to do with how you live your life. Even to sometimes I'm like, I'm a kid, I want to be cool. I'm like, Dad, I want to wear this baby blue do-rag to school. It goes with my polo. You know what I'm saying? He's like, not doing that. Or came home and had my polo off and just had my tank top. He was like, nope, we don't do that. Like, we got to think about how we present ourselves to the world. We got to work twice as hard to get half the credit. So we got to think about how we present ourselves.
Right, and it sounds like for them, it was a matter of survival.
That's right.
So
whereas for me right now, I might be like, look, this is,
right.
If y'all don't want me here, I'm not finna try to be somebody else. Now, that's obviously within reason. You understand, if something happens to my flight and I walk up to the counter, I'm taking my hat off and I'm just like, ma'am, I happen to have an issue. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But for my parents, it wasn't, they didn't have the luxury of wondering how much they need to think about how to present themselves that we do.
Yeah.
In part because their generation thought that we wouldn't have to. You know what I'm saying? So there can often be ways that we can be young, naive, overzealous, and criticize other generations, not realizing we have the luxury of living in a different world because of the way they move.
That's a good word. And one of the things that always messes me up when I see like old movies, civil rights era, is that story of the Army veteran coming home from literally putting his life on the line in war in Germany or something, and then coming back to the States and having to sit on the back of a bus and having to be called boy. And like, it's such a contrast, right? Because it's like, yo, I was just fighting to liberate other people.
That's right.
And now I'm being treated. And that always messes with me when I see it on the screen, but you heard it in your house.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it is, again, it is one of those things that you don't fully grasp and realize until you are older and you're really being like, hey, I remember when we talked about this. You know, one of my grandfather died when I was pretty young. One of my strongest memories was at his funeral, because I'm a little kid and I'm like, oh, they're doing this particular flag thing, and oh, they're firing off guns. It was very scary. I'm a kid. I'm like, what's going on? And I don't understand the significance of it as a kid. But of course, being older, you know, here's what his rank in the military was. Here's the barriers he had to break down. And, you know, for somebody my age, for my parents to have been successful at things, people in my generation whose parents were successful, there's going to be I was the first person to do this. I was first person. My mom was the only Black woman in her dental program. Wow. Held it down. You know, it's going to be a lot of those things that you don't fully appreciate as a kid. But
so I'm starting to see a picture painted already of a certain interesting tension that you're describing, because you come from this legacy. They have discipline, military, hard work, you know, barrier breakers. But you're growing up and you want to emulate the culture you see around you, which is in a lot of ways kind of counterculture to that stuff. And I'd imagine you get to school and the things that they weren't allowing you to do, you were seeing something different.
So I went to a private school for most of my schooling. Second grade till I graduated high school, I was at this particular college prep school. I was cool when I was a little kid, hated once I got a little bit older. Because it just wasn't a cool place to be. Wasn't a lot of Black kids. I'm like, I don't really want to be here. But I had my little crew, ended up staying, and it was cool. But from being a very young kid, the stuff that it wasn't like the stuff they were saying, even though a lot of it didn't sink in, it wasn't like it wasn't ringing true in my experiences at the same time. You know what I'm saying? So like I'm in third grade. At this point, it's also a pretty small school. So like my graduating class was like 50, you know? So like there's like 3 Black boys in my grade at that time. And it's maybe 4. And this teacher was like, hey, Andre, Jeffrey, whoever you are, right? Named all the other Black kids in the class except me, and then went with the whoever you are. Wow. Now, so for me as a third grader, I'm like, oh, yeah. When my dad is telling me when he sits me down at the table and lectures me about things, this is what life is actually like. So while there are some like things that's like, my dad's been, they went like overly disciplined, like no one really thinking about that. I'm not gonna be a thug. But at the same time, you know, I remember times my dad just coming home, like I was just at the store and his kid's pants hanging all down and it bothers him. And I'm like, why is that? Just let him go about his life. But my dad is just thinking, we worked so hard to get an amount of respect from our culture that we want your generation to appreciate and to see the privileges afforded by it. So there was a lot of that back and forth. My first car was like, oh, I'm trying to get a Cadillac, you know, coupe. My dad's like, no, you about to get this Nissan. There's no reason, like, you're going to get pulled over. Why would you be driving it? You know, there's stuff that you think is cool about it that looks a different way to other people.
So I'm seeing that pool, right? So like, all right, so walk us like, so by the time you get to like middle school, which side is like tugging your ear more?
Stuff I'm gravitating towards is stuff I think is cool. Me and my friends think are cool. I've always loved music. I got that from my dad, who's just always playing music in the crib all the time. He wasn't a musician, but you know, just always Stevie Wonder, Sly and the Family Stone, Earth, Wind and Fire, put me on the good stuff.
Music. Oh, yeah. I bet he was probably this is real music.
That's right. He's like, no, come here, sit down, and playing records and tapes and stuff. And he also prided himself on being like, I know what y'all listening to too. But, so I fall in love with hip hop around that time, and so not even just music. Like I'm gravitating towards hip hop culture, and so I'm like, if we go to Dilla's, Dad, I want this FUBU thing, and my dad is just always feeling like, I see the videos you trying to watch, music videos, and I don't want you to be that. I see that you've cut out pictures of Tupac and Big and put them on your wall and the rappers and all these dudes. And that when I see that, that's not who I want you to be. I don't want you to gravitate towards things associated with stuff that my generation is trying to get us away from, you know.
So you're experiencing that intergenerational battle, like right there with your dad.
That's right. And with hip hop, again, didn't understand at the time, but there was so much where he was like, you can like stuff, but just very hesitant because he, as much as we can be excited about hip hop, the beautiful things have been, there's so much content wise that is foolishness, that is not the stuff, even, I haven't watched videos in a while, and me and my wife was just like, let's see what's going on. And sometimes I can like step out and objectively be like, what do dudes be talking about? Like, I cannot believe, and it makes me think like, what chance do kids have? It's like, it shapes our value system. Something I didn't really understand at the time, but like, even if I'm not gonna listen to something and then try to go be a gangster, I am learning things about what I value. Like, I am learning things about how I think about women, how I think about what's cool, how I think about what status looks like, that I didn't realize. And so as I'm being drawn to that, my dad is kind of pushing back against that, and is
so. Let me ask. Let me advocate for Young Trip at the time for a minute, right?
Yeah.
What was it about it that was attractive to you? As someone who knew what good music sounded like, what was attractive to it?
That's a good question. I don't even know if I can pin it down. When you're a kid and everything you like, you think, maybe I could do that. Space is cool. Maybe I could be an astronaut. You know what I'm saying? I love basketball. I love baseball. I'm like, I'm going to be like Bo Jackson. I'm going to play two sports. I'm going to play basketball and I'm going to play, but also same thing with music. It's like, I'm going to be a musician and, trying to play with stuff. There was something about rapping that I was like, I don't know, it drew me in a little bit more, and it seemed like there could have been something there.
Let's go more specific.
Yeah.
Who in particular? You remember Brown Sugar? When did you fall in love with hip hop?
The first rapper I can remember hearing and loving was LL Cool J. I don't even remember what it was. This is the thing. Like, also when you're a kid, there's a limit to your taste levels. Right? It's like, when people put you on the good stuff, you like that. Sometimes put you on stuff that's not that good. And you just like what you hear. You don't know anything. I'm seeing this with my kids, and I'm trying to steer them and give them good musical taste. But I think first hip hop album I had was probably Coolio Gangsta's Paradise. And I'm getting that, and I'm in like third grade, I think.
So when does the spiritual journey kind of start in the midst of this kind of cultural tug of war that's happening?
When I am about 14 years old. So when I was a real little kid, my family would go to church. I can't remember how often we did because it wasn't every single week. I only know that because when we would go, I wouldn't like know all the songs and hand motions all the kids did to that degree. But I know we went enough that I remember being there and heard stuff about Jesus and all of that. When I was about 13, 14, my sister had started to go to the like youth church thing already. And I would decide I was gonna go to a summer retreat just because it was like, I don't even remember. I was just trying to like socialize and talk to girls. And that's what I did in the whole retreat, to the point where the youth pastor like gave me some book about relationships after. It was like, hey, maybe you need to chill.
You were shooting your shot. Oh, you were all over the place.
Yeah. And then I just kind of kept going though. And I had assumed I was a Christian already. Right. I had prayed a prayer after children's pastor when I was a little kid. Did it several times, made sure it worked. I don't think I was a Christian, didn't understand the gospel, loved my sin, did not love Jesus. When I started going to the youth group, I think some of that stuff starts to click. My youth pastor, who I still have a good relationship with right now, godly man, was fun, was hilarious, also opened the Bible and preached the gospel. He was preaching expository sermons to youth group, not in a way we couldn't understand. But the first preaching I'm ever exposed to is biblical. It is expositional preaching. I would ask him all kind of questions. And as soon as I started reading the Bible, my life changed. But this is one of the things about preaching the gospel is, like you don't know where people are at. You don't know where the Lord has their heart.
Mhm.
And if you are faithful, I mean, we don't get to control all of that stuff.
Right.
We don't get to save any souls. We don't get to have someone's heart in the right place.
Right.
We get to proclaim. We get to love as much as we can tell, try to give people what they need. But the Lord knows, and he knew.
Mhm.
And my youth pastor, being faithful, was preaching the gospel. And I think there was the closest thing to me to a moment is we'd gone to this event, and there was like an altar call. And someone was like, and they were talking about, I don't even remember what they were saying. I just know I was like, I don't, they were saying something about surrender. And I was like, I'm not sure I've done that. And I'm not sure I'm a great Lord of my life. I'm not sure I'm doing a great job here. That for me was one of the clearest moments of a very intentional in my heart. You know what? I think I'm gonna like let go of trying to be the Lord of my own life and this stuff that I don't think the Lord likes. I think I'm gonna like try to give that to him
Mm.
and like actively try to go in the other direction. Yeah.
Wow. And that was at 14.
This was around the same time I was starting to not do very good at school because
Okay.
I could not connect it with anything I cared about or that I valued. Well, but at the same time, my curiosity about who God is like going in full bloom. And I'm starting to like read the Bible every day. And then I'm like, ask my youth pastor, like, what's a good book I can read, like Christian? And I hated reading for a long period. I loved reading when I was a little kid, hated it for a long time. It wasn't until I started reading Christian books that I started to read books. There's a lot about who I am that seems like very obviously just who I am. I'm
Right.
just like a learner, I'm super curious about everything. I want to understand things deeply, and then I can't understand things without being like, hey, look at this. That's just kind of how I'm built. But that, hadn't bloomed in me
Right.
yet until then.
So how does this period connect with this whole aspect that's happening in Denton and
Yeah.
this Lecrae and all these folks that are, how did you get connected to that?
So I began to grow, and then I continue to be like one of the youth leaders, but I'm actually like leading. Still ways in my life is a mess.
Right.
But I'm growing a lot, understanding scripture a lot, passionate, and I'm rapping in my church some. But I was like on the praise team, but I can't sing, so I was just like lip syncing, and then it'd be like a breakdown, and I would rap. And it was bad, but they were giving me opportunities. I was having a good time.
Yeah. And I mean, just to pause for a second, that's a pretty significant thing to be happening late 90s, early 2000s, like
That's
the
right.
sense of like a church saying, hey, you want to rap? And,
That's right.
part of what you're doing with youth, that's not a lot of people's
That's
testimony.
right. That's right.
So that says that folks were really into investing in the
That's
youth.
right. And my youth pastor was very intentional about trying to at least understand the worlds we were living in.
Yeah.
And try to allow us to not have to enter an entirely different world
Right.
when we were together at church.
Now, how did your dad feel about this whole spiritual awakening, and then on top of that, now it's bringing you very back to the
Yeah.
thing that he was trying to have you avoid?
So he's not as worried about it as he was about me, just about rap with me just liking gangster stuff and not but so now he's more like he's very practical, like I'm trying to think practically how to help my son be a success in the world.
Right.
And giving all of his time to writing raps in his room is probably not that. And I can't imagine responding differently. You know what I'm saying? It's like, what if you're just a writer? What if you're a great writer? What if you just give time to writing? How about you do this? What about music business? What if he's trying to think about how can I help my son put himself in a position to provide for himself, provide for his family.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? So there was still some pushback, but it was different.
But then you would do your rap part, and so how does that turn into something more?
So I like made this whole mixtape. My room, I had this computer, and like my mom bought me this little mic, and I was like making some beats. I had a friend who made beats. I was very driven. I was like, I'm gonna figure out how to do this.
Right.
What if we do this? I'm gonna figure out this software. What if I tried this? There was very much of I have no idea how, but I'm about to figure this out because it means a lot to me.
And people don't realize at that time period how isolated you felt if you were trying to combine faith in Christ with music.
Absolutely.
At that time, who did you know? What were who did you know were peers and contemporaries that you were even inspired by to lean on, or was there?
So my youth pastor told me about Cross Movement.
Okay.
And so at that time, I really liked Cross Movement. Ambassador was my favorite rapper. Yeah. I was listening to stuff the other day too. I was like, he's very good. Yeah. Like he was very dope. And he's a good friend. And so a lot of that changed my life too, because and him especially, and he knows, he just turned 50, and I told him, you know, like I cannot overstate the impact you had on my life. So I remember so he was at Dallas Theological Seminary at the time, right? So so he would come do stuff sometimes at, you know, events or something that I was seeing. I remember being at some event outside, he's on stage with an Iverson jersey on and like some long shorts and some Timbs. His hair was long at the time. His braids was out, so he was like huge fro. And he also, not only does he know the Bible, he's very cool. And everything he says sounds even better because he's saying it. And so I'm like, wow, you know, like I can still be who I want to be and love Jesus. I'm just throwing off the stuff that don't look like him. Okay. And so it's not only like we love Jesus, it's also like here's a lot of truth we're putting in these bars. And it has such an impact on me, the way my mind is working. I'm like, I want to do that for other people too. Yeah.
Okay, so you decide to put on this project.
Yeah.
On your own.
Yeah, it's called The Messiah's Mixtape, right? I get a kid in my school named Aaron who could draw. He drew some little album cover for me. I like burnt all the CDs in my house. You know, you put the stickers on them. You know, I was like, had a whole, and I was like selling some, you know, I was just like, I'm gonna do this. When I first got to go to a real studio the first time, it was like, I'm a whole rapper now. But,
okay, so you put it out.
Yeah, and it's just, around that time, I had went to a Cross Movement concert. My best friend growing up is Kirk Franklin's son. Kirk Franklin takes us to this concert because he's like, I want y'all to know about this stuff, right? We go backstage, Lecrae, Tedashii, Sho, and Sho Baraka, they're opening for Cross Movement. Or was it Truth? And I'm like, oh, all the stuff I like is like East Coast. So I didn't even know there was Southern dudes rapping about Jesus. And that was like, oh, shoot, right? So I get the album. No one knows who they are. This is 2004. Real Talk, Lecrae's first album has just come out. No one knows about it. No one's a big deal. I took it home, listened to it. I knew somebody who knew him, right? It was like, hey, can you give me Lecrae's number? I was like, sure. I called him. I was like, hey, I'm doing this mixtape release party at my church. Can you and Tedashii come? He was like, sure. Him and Tedashii came and like opened for me my mixtape release party.
Going back to this album release concert, right? Like, I'm curious about how you had the boldness to ask Lecrae and Tedashii to be there on two fronts. One, just on the artist tip, like you don't want to get outshined by your own thing, and you know you got these dudes and these some heavy hitters. But then two, like, man, they got a whole album out, and there's this thing that you're doing that's not on that same kind of platform yet. So what gave you that courage?
Honestly, you know, I think it was a single-mindedness that just didn't occur to me. Neither one of those things occurred to me. I was like, I love God and I'm rapping about Jesus. They love God and they're rapping about Jesus. And they're really good. I would love it if they were there. And yeah, it just didn't occur to me to think like, oh, maybe they're gonna outshine me. They seemed obviously better than me to me. But I was just like, I don't know. It would be amazing if I would only make it better if they were also there. It wouldn't even, I think of it in my mind either to be like, oh, but they're so much further than me. It's like, no, we're doing the same thing. We love God. We're rapping about him. And it's a cool, like, let's do it. And that's exactly how they were thinking too. I mean, who does that? Like, sure, teenager, I'll come right. You know, it's just that like
Mm,
status. That just wasn't what was going through our minds. Sometimes even to the point of like, you should at least be aware other people think about it like that. But for the whole beginning, that's just not
mm.
was not in our minds whatsoever. And I think it shaped how we moved.
And at this point, how you're by far the youngest person in the group.
Yeah, that's right. I'm in high school, everybody's in college. So I'm about 10 years behind everybody.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was that like for you?
Uh it didn't bother me. I though I didn't realize at the time, I think I just got kind of old soul,
Mhm.
like I was like thinking more deeply about particular things. So it was some stuff that it's not even to like make myself sound cool.
Yeah.
It just I don't know. I would rather be doing
Yeah.
this than that. I would rather go spend time with these people who are like influencing
Yeah.
my soul than go to their party.
Yeah.
It seemed more exciting
Right.
to me at the time. It just felt like where my heart was pulling
Right.
me. And so I spent a lot of time with them. They were pouring into me, helping me
Uh,
understand how to read the Bible. Um, it was again another really foundational season for me, which whenever I tell stories about my journey, there are very common themes about seasons when the Lord sent people into my life who poured into me, and it is why I grew a lot in those seasons.
mm.
That I'm really grateful for.
And this is where my introduction to you comes in with the words, Lord, it's obvious they don't know you, but they need to know you. And I pray that they would meet you through us.
Yeah,
That's why
yeah,
we out here
yeah,
in these
yeah,
streets.
yeah,
And I remember thinking when this is the first thing, 116
yeah,
compilation, right?
yeah,
Who is this person and where did this voice come from?
yeah. Which was everybody's response. Yeah, yeah.
So let's just at least open that up because first of all, like, did you know that your voice was very distinct?
No, no, I didn't. Yeah, no, I had no idea. But once we did that, and more people was hearing what I was doing than just my friends and
Yeah.
my mom's friends who bought my mixtape. Yeah, people started to say, "Hey, like you got a really distinct voice, just the way it sounds. That sounds dope." I was like, "Oh, thanks." And that was a big moment for me to get to be on that song with Tadashi and to get to be on the compilation. I was 17 years old.
Yeah.
It felt very much like I got added to a thing that was already amazing, though in hindsight, it's like none of us was doing anything. We was all moving at the same
Yeah.
time, which was really, yeah, it was a special moment for me too. And, I over the years, I've learned from people how impactful that was for them.
Yeah.
Like, bro, you was my age, you was a little younger than me, a little older than me, and it made me feel like, oh, I can chase after Jesus because it's a dude, it's a teenager on here who's,
Right.
so.
When do you realize that it's not just like a feature on a song on this particular group, but that this is, like you said, a season of your life?
Yeah, to their credit, the dudes at Reach were more interested in my development as a follower of Jesus than me being a rapper on the label.
Mm.
So, they were even telling us like, "Hey, I'm working on this. Can you hop on it?" And Craig's like, "You know what? I'd rather us just like link and talk." And for me, that I was like, "Oh, cool," because I was also more interested in my development as a believer. Um, but as time went on, I remember it was when I was 17 and Ben Washer said, "Hey, what would you think about doing an album?" And I was thinking, I would love that. It feels like dream come true to me. It feels like I made it. I'm in high school. Like I was in chemistry class today before you called me to say that. You know what I'm saying? And so I start that first album while I'm a senior in high school. Started when I'm 17. I waited to sign the contract till after my birthday, which was in December. So I, could be 18 signing the contract.
Mm.
And finished the album. My senior high school came out like a couple weeks after I graduated. And that felt like a huge thing. I was incredibly excited. Didn't understand what it was going to turn into at all. But yeah, it was a really exciting season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the album was
If They Only Knew.
If They Only Knew.
Yeah.
Came out the gate strong. Were you surprised with the reaction and the response that the album had?
Yeah. Sometimes it's hard for me to remember what we thought was going to happen.
Right.
It's not this. This is not what I thought.
Right.
And sometimes, Yeah, I think I was very much not a practical person at the time either. So I'm not even sure what I thought it was gonna turn
Right.
into. I don't think I thought this was gonna be my job and I was gonna
Right.
travel the world and say I'm gonna provide for my wife and 3 kids. I
Right.
don't that didn't enter my mind at all.
Right.
I was just like, I love Jesus.
Right.
I love hip hop. I get to do both of those.
Right.
Let's go. That
Yeah.
was kind of it.
So, especially with the 116 documentary coming out, and
Yeah.
we've been kind of in this reflective mode. So, I
Yeah.
talked to Lecrae earlier, and
Yeah.
kind of was like, okay, so this is kind of an origin story of the group,
Yeah.
and every person is almost like a character. So, Show, he said, was the contrarian. Lecrae is, Tadashi mentions this kind of jump into it, very
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
let's do it, let's
That's
just action.
Yeah.
Tadashi, was always questioning things, but they called you the sponge. You were always just soaking up
Yeah.
information. Craig told me this story of how he gave, he was telling you about
Yeah.
systematic theology,
Yeah.
and gave you a book, and then a few days later you came back and was like, you got something else. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's where I was at, man. I just it was like whenever I read something. So I think he put me on A Knowing God by J.I. Packer. That was one, and I read it, and I was like, man, I didn't know God was this big. Like it like for real changed. I was like, oh, like God is like really big. It's like, oh wait, Jesus is God, but like He's God, and every time I was just like, man, God is so much more amazing than I even understood. And I'm like, I want to keep understanding more. And I don't think it was just a stack of knowledge thing. That it was not cool to my friends to read J.I. Pack. That's not a cool thing. It wasn't for me. Like, I don't know. I didn't have much of a context for like it being cool to know theology. It was just like, I was blown away by God. I was like, I want to know more. Help me to understand more and what this has to do with stuff, Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that definitely stuck out to your peers, to be like, yeah, that was what he's on. And even to this day. So that curiosity, you mentioned it earlier. Is that just something like, what other areas of your life that you saw that curiosity?
So that's when it really bloomed, was when I put my faith in Jesus. But it was the same thing with music. Like this is where, like, me and all my friends, we used to rap together in middle school, but there started to like be a shift. I clearly just took to it in a different way. So like we all love Jay-Z. I'm also sitting with the album booklet, studying the bars and trying to understand these double entendres and like, oh shoot, this is why this happens. And this is, I'm printing out lyrics off the internet for other stuff I like. And I'm trying to understand how I can also do that. And I'm writing rhymes every single day. It's just kind of how I approached things that meant a lot to me. And so it was like a season of my life where the only things that mattered to me, for good or bad, was hip hop and Jesus. That was it. And so I'm like, I'm going full speed into those things. As I got older and even the things that Jesus cares about, expanded for me. So it's like, so the way I couldn't figure out why I should care about history class, I was like, I just care about Jesus, is because I'm not understanding yet what the sovereignty of Jesus over all things even means, or what we learn from things that humans have done, and how I look through that through the lens of what Jesus has given me. I didn't understand any of that yet. By the time I graduated high school, it was starting to click. Like, at least it was clicking. Like, Jesus wants me to care about what I'm doing in school. Like, I have to do my work well. But as I get older, my love for reading, I don't think would have happened if I didn't put my trust in Jesus, because it gave me a reason to care about. Like, I couldn't make myself. But once I started to say, oh, Jesus cares about this, and He cares about this, and He cares about this, then just my kind of thirst and curiosity in all kind of areas just continued. And now it sounds weird to talk about that blooming, because it just seems like, if I'm anything, it's curious and I want to learn stuff. And I feel most at home and comfortable when I am learning and growing and seeing more of what's there in the area. But if this is part of how God has made me, what ways does that allow me to be faithful in this kind of, in the spaces that God has put me into? In what ways am I going to have the capacity to dive deeper than other people? And how can I use that for God's glory?
So that why question it looms big. In your book, Rise, you have a chapter, Age is More Than a Number.
Yeah.
And in that, you talk about the surprise that people have when they find out about how young you got married. So
yeah.
I'm sure that's part of the expansion. So tell us about how that happened and what, what that has done in terms of your expansion too.
Yeah, so I went to Bible college in Philly. I went there because two of the people I admired had went to a Bible college. Well, I found out there was such thing as Bible college. And I was like, oh, that's where I'm going to college. I'm going to Bible college. That's because I was wondering, like, I don't know what I'm finna do. And so I was like, oh, and they don't have math at Bible college? Let's go. Because Ambassador had gone there, Truth had gone there. It was called something different before then, and it's called something different now. But I went to this Bible college. My wife, Jessica, she was there a year before me. We met through mutual friends. She ended up going to the same church I was at. And so for me at that time, though, I was like, I'm not trying to get into no relationships because I ain't trying to get married. And I ain't trying to just do no relationships for no reason. So I'm chilling. I had some relationships in high school that was like, I ain't doing that again. And so, long story short, I ended up just like talking to my pastors, like, hey, I think I may like, I like her. I think maybe I could see her as like someone being my wife, which again is, I'm very young. And so I'm like, but I'm probably tripping. So help me out. And long story short, pastor's like, yeah, I mean, just take it slow. But like, we also know her well. She's been around too. That was one of the dope things is we're at the same church plant. And so we are seeing, I get to see her growing. That was one of the things that even when dudes ask me about finding a wife, I'm like, look for the kind of humble heart that grows. I watched her sit under women who were pouring into her, and I watched her grow, and I watched her love for people, her compassion. And they had also seen, it was like, yeah, I think maybe just take it slow, but I think you are mature enough to begin to move in that direction. And so, so we dated for about a year and a half. Then I proposed to her in November of 2008, and my dad was getting sick. So we had planned to get married in the fall of 2009. We moved it up to May of 2009. My dad ended up dying a couple of days before we got married. But we still just went ahead and had our wedding then. And she had graduated the week before. I was still in college. She just turned 22. I was 21. And and there were other things that made that a kind of tumultuous season, but the Lord was really, really good.
Wow.
The thing that was sweet in the season where there were other hard things going on, like my dad dying and all kind of stuff. So
yeah, man, that seems incredibly intense to
Yeah.
have those two things happen.
Yeah, just a couple days
And,
apart.
and I mean, how was your dad's decline pretty fast?
It was. We knew that he was sick, but the decline started to seem a lot quicker than we thought. And so that's when we moved our wedding up.
Right.
And kind of like replanned a whole another wedding just so he could be there. And God knows.
Wow.
But it was really tough. But yeah, I mean, the Lord was really there are ways that the Lord used that to like bring us together really fast, and even like her with my family. Like I think my family likes her more than me. And obviously that's a way to get really close to somebody's family really quick, is to be there in a really tough time in those last moments. She didn't get a lot of time with my dad beforehand. She had come on to visit several times, and they met. He liked her, and she was like, "It's kind of intimidating." And I was like, "Yep." But enough to be able to have some sweet moments. And
So I think at this point, could you see how maybe his trust in you was expanding as he was seeing the trajectory of your life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even in some of his final months, there were things about conversations we had where it's like, oh, you know what? I think there are even times when we had conversations where we were butting heads that I may have even misread how much he listened or even respected my voice as his son. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That in those like final months and levels of vulnerability and conversations, it's like, okay, they could even be, there was more, we're more on the same page on some things than I had understood. And there are more things that I thought he didn't understand that I think he did understand better than I thought.
I mean, have you ever thought that perhaps some of the even though he didn't get to see the full
Yeah.
expression, like you said, '09, everything that
yeah.
happened, he could see it coming
Yeah.
because he could trust you
Yeah.
with what was happening.
Absolutely. Where there was even as there was like, are you sure you want to be a rapper? Or are you sure you want to give? There was also a like, look at what my son has been able to do though.
Mhm.
Like that's a weird. Who's rapping about Jesus and like traveling around the country
Mhm.
as a teenager doing it? It's like, what is that?
Mhm.
You know. So there was a acknowledgement about, oh, okay, and my son is doing something special, and a respect for that, and seeing that even when we butted heads, there was a way that I went about things where there was a mutual
Mhm.
respect for.
And what so there's this incredible talk about season change,
Yeah.
you know, of your dad's passing and then you entering into this new phase
Yeah.
where of being a head of household
Yeah,
yourself.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how that aspect of that season has formed who Trip Lee is.
Yeah. Well, it was the beginning of me and my wife's marriage, and obviously a super tight bond as we went through a lot together in that season. I was diagnosed with an illness in 2007, chronic fatigue syndrome. Still the hardest part of every part of my life. It was especially devastating at first, and then it was kind of this up and down. So my body would just quit on me every semester, and I would keep being like, no, you know what? I'm gonna just take on more credits, and no, I'm good, and just finally was like, I at least need to like step back because this is not great use of my time, and it doesn't seem like this is going to be the way I'm going to be trained for pastoral ministry.
And just from a standpoint, how long have you been married before the symptoms first start to emerge?
No, they started before I got married. So
Okay.
2007 was my second year of college.
Wow.
And we get married in 2009.
Okay.
Yeah. So
And
I understand it a lot less at that time, and I'm still like trying to be normal, even though I'm obviously not. But doctors don't even understand it that well. So it was just
so what did you first notice when you're like, something's wrong?
well, you know, when I got back, it was actually summer after the first tour I ever did. I was on tour with Cross Movement, which for me is like, you know, it's like if, yeah, somebody
You're
going
on
tour with Jay-Z.
with the people that you were looking up to
That's right.
and being inspired by. It's like, does life get better than
That's
this?
right.
Right.
And then I get back to school for my sophomore year, and then I just feel terrible. I'm like sleeping 18 hours a day, and I'm still exhausted the other hours I'm awake. So something's obviously very wrong. And, you know, go to a doctor, they're like, oh, you got Epstein-Barr, you know, take this, you'll be cool. And, you know, long story short, I'm not. And, you know, so there's just kind of this strange, and I go to another doctor, they're like, we'll test you for everything else, think it's chronic fatigue syndrome. It's not really anything you can do. Eat good, do your best. And so that's also hard as I'm trying to understand it, feeling guilty about not doing well in school. There's teachers who aren't super gracious, you know, they don't understand but like we all get tired sometimes, you know.
This was also, would you say that this was at the time kind of the apex of your career musically in terms of?
It was at the season when stuff was really starting
Right.
to ramp, yeah.
Was that difficult to have to forego opportunities and things in order just to try to focus on your health?
It was hard to process it all because I didn't understand what was happening.
Right.
And doctors didn't give much understanding what was happening.
Okay.
And I'm just kind of out here. I'm like, am I just lazy? Is it, you know, it's just a weird, everything about it was strange, you know. And sometimes I look back and I think it is miraculous that albums were made. I'm not really sure how it happened, honestly. But I know people was like on campus, like, I feel like I ain't seen you in months. I'm like, it was strange. I wish I could go back and process it with my 30-year-old brain, but it was just a very strange season for me.
How did your wife, Jessica, and that season of marriage help you navigate through that?
Well, my wife will devote herself to whatever's in front of her as if it is the greatest thing. She's the most disciplined, diligent person I've ever met. And, you know, I couldn't have known. I like to give myself credit for choosing a good wife, but I couldn't have known how great of a wife she would be and how how necessary having her as a wife would be to me being able to navigate things at all. So that even when it's seasons when it's like, oh, it feels like everything's burning down around me, it's like the Lord has very graciously allowed our home to be a not only a safe haven, but a happy place where we have kind of linked arms and wrestled through things together. My health is the hardest thing about every area of my life, including my marriage. And the Lord, even within my marriage, there there are things that we, had to figure out about how to navigate harder seasons with that together. And God has just been so
Mhm.
gracious so that, it's an illness that a lot of people don't understand, but there is like my wife, even when it negatively affects her, there's a level of understanding and grace.
Mhm.
There's a level of, I don't have the insecurity of, is this going to be the time when they're like, I can't mess with you no more. It's too much that I do not have with her. That it's just
Right.
this has
But
been so
because
developed.
it is something that a lot of people don't understand, like
Yeah.
paint a picture of how chronic fatigue syndrome in your own life has
Yeah.
made for very difficult days.
Yeah. It is different depending on, different people. It affects them in different ways. There's some people who life can look pretty normal, other people who are much worse than me and just completely bedridden all the time. Uh, for me, you know, it can vary depending on the season, but I do not remember the last time I felt rested. I don't feel rested. My body doesn't recharge like most people's do. Um, I don't know how many good hours I'm gonna have in any given day.
Mm.
Average day, maybe I have a couple good hours, but I don't have the like I can show up and just work 9 to 5 and know that I'll be able to do. I just
Mhm.
don't know. And so um it's also unpredictable. So it can make it very hard to say, oh, I'm gonna do ABC tomorrow at 3, I got you. And to be able to do that all the time, right? And that can make it hard not only with tasks, but also relationally, you know what I'm saying? And especially when it's hard to understand. Even to like, hey dad, can we play basketball before dinner? It's like, I would really love to.
Mhm.
If we do, I'm gonna just be out. I'm gonna be down for I don't think we can do it right now. So there's that and inability to do stuff, and also I know I said I was going to, but I can't, or I wasn't able to follow through. That just can make stuff
Yeah.
difficult. Then in different seasons, I've had to try to navigate
Yeah.
in different ways.
What's fascinating about that is it kind of comes full circle with the thing, that people have always almost criticized you about, which is
Yeah.
like, you doing too much. Why you going so
Yeah,
fast?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
you young,
yeah,
you got it. Like,
yeah, yeah,
and this aspect of time,
yeah, yeah.
how is this, challenge impacted your perspective on time?
It's certainly reshaped even how my ambitiousness expresses itself. And there's some ways that, you know, I've had to a few times be like, I don't know how to be me with these limitations because I'm like such a big dreamer and I'm ambitious. I'm like, I cannot count on having whatever energy I have for that amount of time. And I feel like right now the Lord is teaching me to be more and more content with what I can do in this moment
Wow.
and then seeing what's next and being okay with that.
There's a track you do called Still Unashamed,
Yeah, yeah,
which I think is especially appropriate in light of this kind of documentary coming out.
yeah.
What did that mean for you? And why was that an important song to do
Yeah.
kind of at this point, maybe 10 plus 15 years in from the beginning of this whole journey?
Yeah.
And especially in terms of maybe what the conversation was
Yeah.
about you and your peers at that point. So just tell us about that song.
Yeah. So a couple things. I want people to know that what I was about in 2006, when I put out If They Only Knew, that's what I'm about right now. The gospel is still the power of God for salvation. Jesus is still king, and that is what my life is about. So, we don't always, especially believers, we don't always deal with any change well. So aside from change that's negative, anything that's a little different feels like, oh, wait, what is this? That's not what you were doing, so it can feel, not feel right to people. So I want to make sure people know. And then on the other side, there are people who do very strongly feel like y'all don't care about this stuff no more. And some of y'all are moving a little different. And there are times when like me and Deuce, who I love, who've been doing stuff, we might disagree on something. That's like that's cool. It's if you don't disagree with people that you love, then I don't think you know them.
Mm,
You know what I'm saying? It's like that's just
mm.
you know. And so just wanting to make that declaration. Um, so that people know I'm still about that. And to just say, just because stuff looks a little different to people sometimes doesn't mean what's core isn't there anymore.
And so I know you're a theological dude. So like, how do you understand missiologically
Yeah.
the value and the importance of being still unashamed, but in a way that's different than 2006?
God did not have to use us at all to bring anybody to himself, to show anybody what he's like. He has, like when my kids ask my wife to help with dinner, and it's like she holds their hand as they like she does not need them, but she lovingly includes them because she loves them. You can help me do what I can do in my own strength. That's what God has done with us. But because we are human beings amongst other human beings who see what's going on, we want to be able to deliver the good news. We want to be able to show people what God is like in ways that connect with them where they are. It's like when we have a conversation with somebody, we listen to them, and then we respond based on what we just heard. And if I'm living in the world and I see where people are at and I see what people need and I see where culture's going, I see where culture's shifting, I want to think, how can I be as faithful to Jesus as ever while also responding to what I see going on around us? I do not want people to feel like when we begin to have conversations about Jesus, we enter into such a different universe that doesn't address any of my issues, any of my concerns. I don't know what you're talking about. That has nothing to do with these issues I had last week. That's nothing to do with the argument I'm having with my wife. It don't have nothing to do with my kids. That what you're saying has nothing to do with that. I want to say, no, we live in the real world, and Jesus has something to say to the real world. You don't go over to some abstract thing when you begin to talk about God. Jesus put on actual human flesh and walked around. And then after he resurrected, he showed up to 500 people who saw him in the actual world, and he walked around. I want you to know that Jesus is still speaking. He's using flawed people to do it. But we got to talk about him in the actual lives that we live. And if we're not paying attention, if we're never adjusting based on what we see in front of us, it's just people are not going to get the realness.
So good. So it's like, if we're going to be real about being the body of Christ in the same way that he indwelled among us and touched people, ate with people,
That's right.
that we have to then be his hands and feet. And that means engage and touch the issues that they are dealing with, which will change over time. They're not the same things from 10 years ago. But one of the things that is the same and is the fact that I think maybe this was part of what touched me to see you and Tadashi on the track, because it took me all the way back 10 years before. 116 compilation. Who cares, about the lack with the steering wheel made of wood. Was there an intentional symmetry between that moment and kind of like, we're the same people that we were from the very, very first time you put on the track?
Absolutely. That was absolutely the intention. Actually, originally, it was going to be me, Lecrae, Show, and Tadashi on it. It just didn't all come together, and it was the last song that I did for the record.
Wow.
But yeah, that was absolutely very intentional. I want people to see that.
And what has that meant for you on a relational side? Because when we started it, it was clearly not before the music, like you said, it was them pouring into you.
Yeah.
What has that meant now, 15 years later?
Yeah.
On a personal level, what has being part of this group and this community meant for you today?
It's helpful to roll with a squad of people who are about that same thing. And I think that's part of the power of what we've done. It's not like, oh, look at that one guy who loves God. It's like, look at this group of people who love Jesus. And this is part of what I love about more people coming along, some of the younger dudes and Wine Day. And, it's like, I think it's important for people to see, not only is there just one person who's like me, but there are a bunch of people who love God, standing firm on who he is, because that can just give us the kind of confidence that, like, not like my trust is in them, but it's I've seen God do it before, so I know he can do it. I've seen him do it. And not just, it wasn't like one time he did it. He's done this several times, you know? And if that was like the thing that my career meant, the Lord used my career to show people that God can work in someone's life, no matter, you know, where they come from, what age they are, he can use them. If that was impressed on people because of what God has done through me and that was it, I'm good.
Well, it has, and I could say that on a personal level, being part of the older group that was seeing this young buck come along to now you still look the same young buck, but being a little bit older, it has been a blessing to see you roll through the challenges of life with a still sense of faithfulness. So thank you, Trip, for joining us, man.
Yeah.